The war in Ukraine is in its 5th month. War fatigue has been mounting. But in Europe, the signs of distress have been multiplying. The euro has plummeted to a 20-year low against the dollar. Recession predictions are on the rise. Food banks are feeding more and more people. And countries are turning down air conditioning. These are all signs of how the Kremlin has provoked an energy crisis across Europe. Europe depends on Moscow for natural gas. The Kremlin is now gradually choking off the same gas that keeps the industry working. Europe's most pressing challenge right now is to battle record inflation and get through the winter season without crippling energy shortages. Higher energy prices are already flowing through to factories, food costs, and fuel tanks. For the energy-intensive industries, the future is uncertain. They could face natural gas rationing to protect homes if the crisis worsens. The economic woes also reflecting on the dinner table. For example, a typical Italian family is spending 681 euros more this year to feed themselves. The French President Emmanuel Macron says the government aims to conserve energy. The plan is to switch off public lights at night and take other steps. Similarly, German officials are begging the people and businesses to save energy. They are ordering lower heat and air conditioning settings in public buildings. The scenario looks bleak for Europe, but for Russia, things look much better for now. High energy costs fueled by the war are benefiting Moscow. Russia has stabilized its ruble exchange rate through government intervention. As for Russian oil, it is finding more buyers in Asia, even if it is at discounted prices. Currently, there is no imminent sense of crisis in Moscow. Living with sanctions for years means that the Kremlin has built a fortress economy. It has kept debt low and pushed companies to source from within Russia. But economists say the current picture is misleading, because Russia's ironclad measures could be detrimental in the long term. A sign of this is Russia defaulting on its foreign debt payments for the first time in more than a century. The annual inflation rate in June was 15.9%. The retail trade is set to fall by 8% this year. Car sales fell by 83.5% in May. Now, the official forecast of fall in the GDP is 7.8%, but the unofficial forecast stands at around 30%. Since the war, Moscow has prevented money from leaving the country. It has also forced the exporters to exchange most of their foreign earnings into rubles. These measures have rigged the exchange rate. The inflation rate, too, has partially lost its meaning. It does not account for disappearing Western goods. And also, lower inflation probably reflects plummeting demand. So while Europe's problems may be short-term, Russia could face challenges in the future. Joining us on the broadcast from London is Greg Swenson. He is the founding partner of Brick McAdam, which is a merchant banking firm. Greg, good to have you with us. How do you see the economic fallout of this war impacting Russia and the West in the long term?
Yeah, the long term is the real question, Molly. It's a great question. And I think ultimately the Russian economy will suffer because I don't think that they can really last for a long period of time. And this might be a replay of the 80s, where the U.S. economy grew exponentially. And that's really how the Cold War was won, by growing the economy. But it's the short term that I think most people in the West are worried about. You know, as you mentioned in your report, the ruble has stabilized. The capital controls that Putin and the Russians put in place have actually worked. You know, in January, you could buy, 80 rubles for $1. At the beginning of the war, it went up to 150. In other words, the ruble went down. You could buy 150 plus rubles for $1. Well, now it's down to 55. So the ruble's actually up 42% year to date. So he's actually crafted a pretty good, I think they were prepared for this. And he's with the capital controls, raising interest rates to 20%, for example. It's definitely stabilized the ruble. The question is, with a strong ruble, will that hurt exporters to friendly countries? They are selling commodities at higher prices. Obviously, with oil hovering around 100, a stronger ruble is actually okay because it's offset by the higher oil prices. So, look, I don't know how long it will take, but the sanctions are not as effective as the West had hoped because he still has friends. He's using food as a weapon. He's weaponized both energy security, which you mentioned, as well as food security. So, you have countries like Indonesia and Egypt and Pakistan and Bangladesh, Morocco, that did not vote for any of the resolutions in the UN. And so they do have some friends, and maybe they're not real friends, but when you're weaponizing food and energy, I think it gives them some control. And now you have the crisis with Nord Stream and cutting off natural gas exports to Western Europe. And it's so in the long run, I'm confident that the West can sort of win this Cold War, but it's going to have to be with pretty dramatic policy changes. So the energy policy in Europe has been a complete and utter disaster. And frankly, the energy policy in the US has also been a disaster. So until the West, especially the US, which until the Biden administration was the world's leading energy producer and had achieved energy independence, until those policies are changed and allow the US to once again become the world's biggest producer, then I don't think they will win this economic war with Russia. Energy security is really national security, and we're seeing that now with what Europe is going to go through this winter, as well as I think you'll see blackouts even this summer in the U.S., specifically in Texas and California during this heat wave.
Right. What do you make of the measures that Moscow has taken to try and shield itself from the economic consequences? It is defaulting on its foreign debt payment for the first time in more than a century.
Yeah, look, that obviously wasn't good news, but again, because they're isolated, or he's allowed himself to be isolated from the West, I'm not sure that really matters, And again, when they defaulted, the ruble was having real difficulties, but that's stabilized. So, obviously, Russia's not coming to the capital markets anytime soon, but I think they prepared for that by buying friendly currencies to manage some of their own currency risk. They bought a lot of gold. They've stashed a lot of U.S. dollars away. So, Putin prepared for this. I don't think he expected the unified reaction and solidarity in Western Europe and the U.S., but I do think that because the rest of the world hasn't really cooperated with the sanctions, it's definitely a relief for Putin. And as you pointed out, he's continued to sell oil. The Europeans were paying Putin $1 billion a day at the beginning of the war. Now he's cut back on deliveries to Western Europe. It's put them in a really difficult position. Germany especially, whose industry is going to be really hurt by this. You mentioned Macron in France asking people to black out or to turn lights out, or asking the utilities to do that. That's not a good sign. Obviously, France is in a better situation because they have nuclear energy. In fact, they're exporting energy to the UK. So, look, I think in the near term, this has turned out a lot better for Russia than the West expected. The long term, I think ultimately the West will win, but it's only when they clean up and fix the energy policy in Western Europe to a more realistic policy. And then the U.S. has got to change, hopefully after the midterms or definitely after the election in 24.
Greg, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast and sharing those insights.
Thanks, Molly. Good to be here.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.